Hello everyone, and welcome to the Steve Show, where we provide only the best interviews for our amazing viewers. Today, we have with us a very special guest, President Harry S. Truman, born in Lamar, Missouri on May 8th in 1884, who would later move on to become the 33rd President of the United States of America. His first term being when President Roosevelt died in 1945, and his second term being when he won the 1948 election against Thomas Dewey. How are you doing today, Mr. Truman?
I'm doing great, thanks.
So, Mr. Truman, when President Roosevelt died so suddenly, it shocked the entire nation. How did you feel on your first day in office, having been suddenly thrown into a position of extreme power and importance?
Well, I must say, Steve, I felt completely overwhelmed. You see, in the 11 weeks of President Roosevelt's fourth and final term, I only spoke with him on 2 occasions, and neither time was anything of consequence discussed. It was only trivial matters. And you know, World War II was raging across Europe and the Pacific at the time, and I did not know the details of Roosevelt's complex war strategy. I was completely in the dark. I had to get my new staff to write a detailed report on the progress of the war, and I had to study up fast, because after all, I was in charge of the United States' decisions in the war now, and if I was clueless as to what was going on, I would be no help at all.
So, Mr. Truman, isn't it true that very soon after you came into office, you learned of the Manhattan Project of nuclear weapons that had come from it?
Yes, sir.
So, what were some of the key reasons for your decisions to use the nuclear bomb on the Japanese in World War II?
Well, Steve, one of the most important and influential reasons for my decision to drop the nuclear bombs was the Battle of Iwo Jima. There, the Japanese fought almost literally to the last man standing in order to defend the island, and they never surrendered. The battle cost tens of thousands of Japanese and American soldiers' lives. I knew the Japanese would defend their home islands with the same ferocity, determination, and stubbornness that they had possessed at Iwo Jima, which would make it all the more difficult to land a proposed invasion force and then successfully take over Japan. Another important reason was in order to save lives.
What? Those bombs over Hiroshima and Nagasaki killed a combined total of 100,000 people.
Yes, but you see, we were already conducting air raids over Tokyo and other targets with conventional weapons that were killing that many people in a single night. And what's more, the Japanese didn't react to it at all. They were never going to surrender, even though they knew they would never be able to win the war. We thought the new bombs would shock the Japanese and change the nature of the war, so that they would finally surrender, thereby saving the lives of millions and millions of Japanese and American civilians and soldiers from a long, drawn-out war. The nuclear bombs were successful in the sense that they shocked Emperor Hirohito into surrendering, and stopped a long and harsh war.
So, Mr. Truman, tell me about your strategy for your campaign to get elected for your second term.
Well, in my campaign for re-election, I heeded the advice of a friend and decided not to focus on my performance, but to focus on the horrible performance of the Congress I got stuck with that term. That Congress, which I nicknamed the Do-Nothing Congress, was the reason for America's problems, not me. They had passed the awful Taft-Hartley Act over my veto to try and restrict the collective bargaining rights of unions. They stopped my education bills flat, and they did not pass farm price supports. They also shut down my civil rights initiative. I could have passed a whole slew of helpful policies and reforms if it weren't for that lazy Congress. My campaign strategy worked, however, and I won the 1948 election, much to everyone's surprise.
So, Mr. President, looking back on your past, what do you believe will be the legacy of your administration?
Well, I believe my administration will be remembered most for ushering in the nuclear age. I may have ended World War II and saved millions of lives with my decision to drop the nuclear bombs on Japan. However, it had partially unforeseen consequences. Because of those 2 nuclear bombs, a nuclear arms race with the Soviet Union began, which would eventually snowball into the Cold War. Because the U.S. backed democracy and the Soviet Union backed communism, the Cold War caused America to be dragged into wars against the advance of communism in Korea and Vietnam.
Well, that's all we have time for today, folks. Join us next week as we interview former President Lyndon Johnson. See you next time on The Steve Show.